All right, good morning. Can I say that it's really nice to see all of you? I feel like it's been way too long. I've been so far away from here and then back, like, so it feels even longer because I was so far away. I'm so sorry about Monday. We got to the airport on Sunday. We got off the ship, we got to the airport, and they just kept pushing our flight back. Like, it was supposed to leave at 2, and then it was 3, and then it was 5, and then it was 1 a.m. And I wasn't willing to do the 1 a.m. flight with 3 children, so we took the Monday morning flight. But as we were on the plane, I was like, oh, my class, right? So I'm sorry that I wasn't here on Monday. It made for a very miserable day. There was like snow in Denver, I guess. That was the only reason they gave us for the delay. But I had a really good, mostly good cruise. I got food poisoning from the ship. Okay, so let me back up. Night 1 on the dessert menu was something I've never tried. And I was like, ooh, I'll try that. Boston cream pie. Not something super exotic, but I've never tried it. And so I ordered that along with a chocolate cake and maybe like 2 other things, right? And I ate the Boston cream pie and spent the next 36 hours just like near death. Like,
Oh my God.
my mother-in-law and I both had it. And we both got sick. So we know it was that because nobody else got sick, just me. So yeah, I had a very miserable start to the cruise, and it sadly dented my like weight gain plans. Right? I can find the good in that, obviously, but I only gained a half a pound. I gotta go again, right? I had such strong goals of like 5 pounds. But I did manage to eat 32 croissants, even despite having 2 days where I was sick. I had to make it up. 32, they were bigger. Like, so I feel like that should be like 64, but 32 sounds more reasonable. So I ate a lot of croissants. It was fun. I zip lined, I held an alligator. I did all sorts of like cool things, right? I survived going to Haiti. So it was a lot of fun and hard to come back from. I'm still on like Miami time, 3 hours ahead. Miami and I didn't go well. I silenced an entire restaurant. I haven't experienced that one. I walked into we went to TGIF in Miami, and like the restaurant went silent. And I was like, what's happening right now? That's why I don't live in Florida, but it was like everyone just stared at me and went quiet. I haven't experienced that in like 10 years.
In Miami?
In Miami, right? In Miami. Yeah. It was shocking, yeah. I mean, Florida and Texas are 2 places I know better than to live for myself personally. But I did appreciate the cruise, and it was a lot of fun. So I'm so sorry though that it cost us Monday. We do still have enough time to get through kind of the rest of everything. And I wrote some reminders up here. So today is our last time that we meet. And my poor class had to deal with this before, and you'll have to deal with it today. I'm very sentimental at the end. Some of you know that about me already. I will say last way too many times today, but that's because I will miss you. I really legitimately will miss you. This has been such a fun class that I'm sad that it's over, or close to over. We still have an hour and 10 minutes. I'm gonna soak up all of that. So I wrote a few things up here. I'm so sorry. I coded the participation exercise wrong in Canvas, and I threw some of you off with that. I put it as participation 7, which we had already done. Many of you emailed me about it, which I didn't get until yesterday, but that's okay. So what I wanted to do so that nobody is hurt by my mistake, if you didn't turn in the homework that I assigned while I was gone, which was participation 9, not 7, that's that little worksheet about chapter 14 with the sexual disorders. If you didn't turn it in, you can still email it to me before the end, like the end of the day today, and I'd be happy to count it for you. Okay, so some of you turned it in. And it overrode, like I broke Canvas while I was gone, but that's okay. So if you still have that to give to me, or you want to do it before the end of the night, you can still turn it in. After today, so today is our last like normal class. What will happen is on Monday, we have our final exam. Like all of our other tests that we've taken, it's on Canvas. It's just a 3rd exam. It's not cumulative in any way. So what will happen is Monday morning that will open up, and just make sure you complete it before the end of Monday, like you did the other 2 tests in here. And I offered this to my other class. I'd be happy to offer it to you as well. Would anyone want me to open it early? I'm such a like, we're near the end, get it done. I just want things done at this point, right? So what I'll do is after our class today, I'll open this up, but I'll still send out a message Sunday night. This is our last normal meeting because we start finals week, right? So what we'll do is it's due by Monday night, but I'll open it early in case you want to start it early and just have it off of your list. The only other thing that we have, if you're on Canvas, is we do have a little closing assignment. And some of you have already turned it in. I've been grading them as they come in. But the closing assignment is my chance to give you like a cumulative element without a cumulative test. I've always thought cumulative tests are really mean, so I don't give them. So what you're doing for this, if you click on assignments, you'll find it on here, is you're taking 5 things that you've learned over the course of the semester. It's right here, closing assignment. And you're going to write about 5 things that you've learned that you could apply to your life in some way. Okay? And it's not necessarily like a paper. You're kind of following like a very like, specific format. You're going to give me a term or concept. You'll define it, which can be copied from the book. And then you'll give me a paragraph telling me how you could apply it. So let's say something that we covered, I'm going to look at this here, something related to like anatomy was really helpful for you. You pick that term, you define it, and then give me like a paragraph of how it could help you, how you could apply it to your life in some way. So this is worth 25 points. So it's more than a participation. So definitely do it. It'll be due by Monday night. Everything's due by Monday night. And I have this up here on Canvas for your instructions. And like I said, about 6 or 7 of you have already done it, and I've already graded. Are there any questions about any of those things about museum closing assignment? I'd be happy to keep talking about it. I want to go on another one. I'm ready. I have some more eating to do. I didn't eat to my full potential. Any questions? One last thing then, double check Canvas sometime today, tomorrow, this weekend. Just make sure that everything for your grade is correct. If something is wrong or it's missing and you don't think it should be, send me an email and we can look at it. It's so easy to fix that now. Once I submit final grades, it's complicated. So if you find that something's missing, if you didn't turn in one of those 25-point homework assignments, you can still do them for up to half credit before the end of Monday. So just kind of look over that and reach out to me if anything is wrong, and we can kind of address it together. And we have one last participation, which we'll do together today, and then your grade should be pretty complete. Feeling good? Everything clear? Okay, so what we'll do today is we're going to look over, I kind of have one last thing I want to cover related to the last chapter, and then we'll spend the rest of our time on our last chapter, which is chapter 18, related to selling sex, or sex for sale. So I normally would have done this on Monday, but sadly, like I said, we're stuck in Florida. So one last topic for chapter 17, and I have a song and a little activity that we're going to do with it for that last assignment, is intimate partner violence. And I know we made it through some of 17, but not all of it. And so this is kind of the last thing I want to highlight from it. So we talked about rape and sexual assault and pedophilia, domestic violence, which is now called intimate partner violence, is the last form that they talk about in this chapter. And this is something that is just so on the rise. We're seeing more and more and more domestic violence or intimate partner violence, sadly. And it's this pattern of behavior where you're exerting power or control or violence over somebody that you're in a romantic relationship with. And you're using intimidation or threats or like harassing behavior. Sometimes this myth that you can't, force sex on somebody that you're in a relationship with, that is definitely not true, right? And so we see patterns of this where it's physical or emotional or sexual, or maybe even with money, right? You can do this with money as well. But it tends to follow like a very cyclical pattern, right? And so what you see is that there's some kind of incident of abuse of some kind. Maybe it's physical or emotional or sexual or financial. There's an abusive event, and then the person feels bad about it, right? And so what happens next is they express like remorse or guilt. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I'll never do it again. I feel bad. Oftentimes leading to like very sweet and loving behavior. Almost like you're on your best behavior after that, like being overly kind, giving gifts, going out of your way to make up for it and prove that that's not how you really feel. And then something happens again, there's some kind of like stressor or event in the relationship. And we go right back to this. It's like this ongoing cycle. But people oftentimes have a very difficult time getting out of abusive relationships because of some of the stuff that happens in the middle. Well, they felt bad for it. They apologized for it. They didn't mean to. It was a one-time thing. It won't happen again. They're getting help. They were so kind and sweet and loving afterward. But then something happens and we're right back here. It's this very like cyclical pattern that people oftentimes have a hard time getting out of. So it tends to be more of a pattern of abuse rather than like a one-time isolated incident. And people tend to stay with partners either out of fear or because they feel like they've changed. And not to say that people can't change, but it does tend to be very like cyclical and very pattern oriented. There's lots of like movies and songs that highlight this. I want to play a song for you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand out the lyrics to it. And then I'll have you get into like pairs or like small groups after and work on it. But as we're listening to the song that we have the lyrics, the video is also very like distributed. This is your last participation. I just want to see how many times I can say last. My kids told me this morning, they're like, please don't do that to your students today. And I was like, oh, I will. I can't help it. Like I said, I'm sentimental. All right, so as I'm playing the video and the song for you, if a lyric jumps out to you, feel free to underline it or highlight it or whatnot. And then I gave you some space at the end. So after we play the song and listen to it, I'll have you get into groups and kind of work on it together. But you can easily say this whole song and whole video is about like intimate partner violence in this cycle. But I think you can see a lot of evidence of it in the lyrics and also in the video. So let me play this for you. Already started. Yeah. 45 minutes. And then same thing like relax, that's not at all. Or like guys are like I'm leaving you and going really late. Yes. You want to try it. Yeah. And also, he's a commercial. Oh, well, it's ours now. Like, are we money on it? Seriously, forgery. Thank you for voice. I will not teach. Okay. I mean, straight up saying that when it's full, you know, it's weird, start item. Yeah, I'm sorry. Like that doesn't look right there. Like that's not even cool. You know, like I'm sorry. It's the only way I know. That's right. I understand. Me too. This is not a color. Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. No, exactly. Not joking. No, exactly. I was looking at the other day and some guy, like, I really didn't know this, and got to finally know this, and like, screaming at him, and back.
This is literally all I know. Okay. Are you turning it over? Okay. Oh, right. Very.
Where it's like, you kind of like fire around here and this stuff like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's what.
I mean, I figured.
Yeah.
I figured that was hard. I didn't like, oh, yeah. Are they must be over there? Where? Oh, okay. Right. One of those. What next time on this, I'll be like this.
Yeah.
Cause that's continuing, like, there will be next time, like, again, the pattern. You know what I really like seeing? Like, what we used to go to, like, online. It's so clear.
I think them being over there. Like if you're in where we relationship and you know it,
Yeah.
like this all, it's so weird. I think you guys are weird. Yeah, I know.
Have you seen that after? Yeah. So she has like, you know, she had a kid, right?
Yeah.
She has like, yeah, she's getting that treatment in her baby bed.
Yeah.
Like, it was so pretty. He was like, so whenever you have more kids. And she's like, I didn't know she's big.
Yeah.
And then he's like, what? And then, like, she like gulps, and then
Buddy.
it just doesn't really like, you just know when somebody's uncomfortable. He's that. Okay, what else? If she ever tries to fucking me, I'm tired of the, it's a little dramatic. I'll say that's a little bit, you know? Also insinuating that she can't read, she'll stop with them.
Yeah, I did. You know, the first clip I did not.
Yeah.
Not on social media.
I thought it was a different character. You know, like, come back, everybody's right now, like, you're a lot of, like. What is that word you said? What's that word you said?
Cyclical,
Yeah.
like it's a cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He would do something, and then he would give her like. And then goes.
I don't get
So I'll give you a few more minutes again to kind of get your thoughts down and make sure you're ready.
This one, it's the rage that took over and controls you. Cause I feel like that's something that where it's like, so I was right, it's not just something that it is fault, but saying it's both of yours fault because it, well, we saw, not in the video, but just in the song, it insinuates that they're both fighting with each other or something.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important too, because it's like. Yeah. You want.
That's like.
And then you wrote down about the part where you talked about the router.
Yeah. No, that's all I got.
Right? Or like when you get like, yeah.
Yes. Okay, over.
I vote. I have one from like, big rock. I don't know, it was like red, checkered. But I also have like one that was just. Really? I don't like. Oh.
Some generation of iPod, I hear what it was like. What if they plug it in backwards, you're trying to work, like, all the power.
Yeah.
I think there's a design.
You know what I really hate? How they switched it from iPhone to the C.
USB-C.
And it's like, we all have iPhones,
Yeah.
and then my mom's like, oh, you have a charger, and I'm like, yeah, and I was like, oh, wait, and then you're like, no, I don't like charger.
It's so much fast.
I know, but like, I don't know, like, I feel like it's one of those things like maybe.
All right, so just like another minute or so, and then we'll talk about it.
Maybe the Apple and make it better.
Yeah.
Everything's not.
Yeah.
True. Well, I'm still on my iPhone 13.
Yeah. I saw about 13.
Well, I feel the 16 is not that good, and I actually my phone, and I actually like sixth grade. With the.
I didn't even get it. I didn't even know it was alive.
It's like somebody took my photos and put them in the gallery.
Yeah.
Stupid. I mean, there's others, but things that are like this. Like, I like this a little bit.
I like that. It's a little busy.
It is, but you know what I really actually like, I like the colors on it.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
That's very good.
Oh. Well, people say I feel like it's simple compared to Amazon, but now I feel
I
like.
get it. It's hard before. It's like, actually, I think it was.
Yeah.
Or like, by that.
You know what, I thought to you, one time I was out, so you know they have.
All right, everyone ready? For the most part? Okay, so I don't want to spend a ton of time, because again, I think you could easily say the whole song, but are there any like examples or lyrics or anything that like really jumped out at you as being a good example of this cycle or like intimate partner violence? Anyone have any like thoughts or things that you circled, highlighted that? Yeah.
Well, there's quite a few, obviously.
Right.
But one that actually really stuck out was it's the rage that took over, it controls you both. And I think it's important because sometimes as a society, we kind of always blame the man, and I'm not saying that's sometimes the case. But in this particular line, it's insinuating that they're both abusive to each other.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the video, but in the lyrics, it's saying like, they both get this anger that seems like uncontrollable. And then it's abuse from both sides, not just the man. So.
Yeah, and I was very purposeful in choosing an example that had both sides, because we do tend to, as a culture, portray that this is much more common in men, and while it can be, it can come from either end, and right, and there aren't always, men in a relationship, right? So there are a lot of different dynamics, and it can easily be that both people fuel each other, right? I like that. Other thoughts? Yeah.
When you punch the wall, how
Yeah.
close, that's a strong, signal. I mean, how close is the next time you want to punch her?
Yeah, for sure.
It's less and less every time, right?
Yeah, and I love the way that they show that violence, because it can be physical violence like that, and then the symbolism of everything being on fire, just the heat, the anger, the passion, like our culture loves to kind of portray them together sometimes too, yeah.
I think it was really interesting, right? When a tornado hits one,
Yeah,
the wrong way to put it.
yeah,
It's like a really, so many things can be said just by saying those few little words.
yeah, it's a really good line, right, of that like energy matching each other, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you see that cycle so much in there, right, of like the anger and then, you know, kind of falling back into like normal and then back to that. And then you see that, like, he gives her, what, a teddy bear or something like that at one point as like an apology. There's often a lot of like gift giving, sweet loving and normal behavior in the middle of these things, but it just keeps fueling itself. And something that I wrote down too is like our culture loves to portray like passion and anger together. Right, and like, so if you think of example, an example of that would be that like people when they fight have like makeup sex, right? Like angry, like makeup sex. And like, it's a very interesting like way of connecting the two. And for some couples, they do, and other couples, like definitely not, like there's all over the place with that. But I think that our culture kind of portraying violence and sexuality together in the number of ways that we do only sometimes adds to this cycle, and people oftentimes really fear for their life in, you know, relationships that are as violent as the one that's happening in this song. Any other like thoughts, comments, anything else about the song, the lyrics, the video, anything other than all? Right, it's definitely the whole thing. Anything else? All right, you want to make sure your first and last name is on whichever one you're turning in. Go ahead, pass those up and I will take them from you. Pass up your last participation.
It's color coded.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anybody else? All right, so in the time that we have left, we'll move on to chapter 18, which is sex for sale, right? So selling sex. And this is something that is very prevalent in our culture, right? Using sexuality to sell things or to get your attention. So we'll talk about a few different types, just kind of sexuality in the media in general. We'll look a little bit at the P's, prostitution and pornography, and then kind of wrapping up with these topics here. So last set of slides. I'm sorry, I'll stop. I should have kept track, but no. My daughter literally just 2 minutes ago texted me and said, "Are you doing it?" Yep. All right. Anyway, and then asked if I had bought Sonic the Hedgehog tickets. Yeah, that's the main priority. Okay, obviously, right? Last night she's like, "It comes out on the 19th. You bought tickets?" No. Speaking of, no. Okay. So what we'll look at first here is how we use sex in the media. And we obviously use a lot of sexuality in the media, especially with advertising. Very strong connection throughout history of sexuality and advertising. And a big reason for that is because sex sells. When we advertise something, a product, for example, we have to do 3 things. And these 3 things are getting harder and harder to do. The first one is to get your attention, to get you to stop what you're doing and pay attention to the ad, whether it's a video or something you're looking at, whatever it might be, right? To get your attention. And as that gets harder and harder to do, we tend to use more and more bizarre, odd things to do it, or more overt sexuality. And that's kind of what we're focusing on here. So we have to get your attention, and then we have to get you excited about the product. One of the ways that we often do that is by making it desirable or making like sex part of that. Sex tends to excite people. And so we use a lot with advertising. And then the last like prong of that is to get you to associate the excitement with the product so that you want to then buy that product or use it. So if you look at ads, we use an incredible amount of sexuality to do this. Open any pop culture magazine, and the ads are such great examples of this. Oftentimes there's like perfume and cologne ads that have nothing to do with perfume and cologne. It's just a bunch of naked people and then a little picture of the cologne in the bottom, right? I saw one on our trip and I should have ripped it out, but there's so many examples of it. It was a bottled water. It was a smart water ad. There was no bottle of water anywhere. It's just a naked person like saying thirsty. And at the bottom it said smart water. Oh, like, okay, right? Like just so frequent, like that we use this. It's very easy to find examples. I have a couple to share with you. I had to really limit myself. So I limited it to 3. And I'll start with the mildest and then we'll progress. And oftentimes what we end up seeing is that ads that are overtly sexual end up getting banned. But the second we ban them, what happens? What they become more popular is what happens. The second something's been banned because it's controversial, everyone goes and looks it up, right? And so in essence, if it becomes banned, it almost becomes more successful. So commercial that was also banned, and I couldn't find it this morning, but the idea is that again we use sexuality here as a way to get your attention, and oftentimes these really overtly like sexual commercials are banned, but it only tends to make them more popular. So we see an incredible amount of sex used here, whether it's overt or more subliminal. Sometimes messaging and advertising is a little bit more subliminal, but all of those were very like overt and blatant. But we use a lot of sex in the media because it gets your attention, and we have to get you excited and being paying attention, and that's harder and harder to do the more we go on in time. If you have a fun example, feel free to email it to me. Tell me before tell me what I'm opening, right? But email it to me. All right. Some of the main ways that we sell sex. So we'll talk a little bit about pornography and prostitution. Those are 2 big parts of this chapter. A little bit of a distinction here: pornography versus erotica. Okay, so pornography is something that's been around for a very long time, right? Through a lot of different lenses, a lot of different ways of delivering it. This can be text, it can be images, it can be video. But pornography is any kind of sexually explicit material intended to cause arousal. Lots of stereotypes of pornography. Sometimes they're true, sometimes they're not. But there is another branch called erotica. And this is something that's gotten more and more popular over the last like 10 to 15 years. So we've had like very hardcore pornography. Sometimes we talk about soft versus hard pornography, different layers of how much to expect in the film, I suppose. But erotica is something that has made a huge like kind of resurgence in a way. It's geared toward couples a little bit more. And it tends to display things that are a little bit more like mutual, a little more balance of power, less of the stereotypes, and a whole subgenre of this that got popular with the blockbuster erotica, right? And so starting back in like the early, like, let's say like 2010, 2012, we started this whole category, what we call blockbuster erotica, where they made full-length feature films with plot, like Pirates. This was the first one to become popular based on Pirates of the Caribbean, right? They made a whole bunch of these different movies trying to cater to couples, right? So there was actually some plot to it, a little bit less of the like stereotypes, but pornography is more of the like kind of standard that most people tend to think of. It comes in every possible speciality, every possible genre and niche. A lot of you went to sex shops as one of your assignments. The amount of pornography that is available is incredible, right? There's so much of it in every single little subgenre that you can imagine. This is something that is legal only over the age of 18, but with the internet and technology, this is something that a lot of people access quite a bit earlier than 18. It's very accessible, whereas it used to be a little bit more restricted where you could only get it in the store. And as I mentioned, this is not a modern invention. One of the things that tended to launch this into a much bigger industry was the invention of Playboy. So Playboy, when it came out, was one of the biggest things that kind of launched this. Another one was the invention of the VCR. I asked my kids last night if they knew what a VCR was, and they were like, no, right? VCR, like videos, right? A movie. And we don't do movies anymore. No VCRs. I don't even think I have a VHS tape at home. But when the VCR came out, there was a first one that was super popular called Deep Throat, right? Or Debbie Does Dallas. There's some very like big, like popular ones that came out back in like the 1960s that tended to launch this into another level. So Playboy and the invention of the VCR, and then later like DVD, and then later the internet, have played a really big role in the availability of pornography over time. when we talk about pornography, this is obviously something that's really controversial. And what makes it controversial is the idea of what is obscene. This is a huge thing that is constantly in the news, especially where we live. A lot of pornography is produced in Los Angeles and Burbank area. But obscenity is a term that gets at this idea with pornography of what is okay to show and what isn't. What do we need to censor? And there are three kind of rules to obscenity, but these are constantly changing and evolving. The dominant theme of the work, it's deemed obscene if it appeals only to the prurient interest in sex, which means lustful. So there's no like artistic, political, or scientific value to it. It appeals only to lust, which is what we could say with prurient. And it's offensive to the community standards. So what they often do in order to decide this is they gather a panel of jurors, they show them a film, and if they're offended by it, then it might qualify as being obscene. So this is something that comes up over and over and over again as we're trying to decide what is obscene and what isn't. Back in time, we created something called the Cambria list, and it kind of came up with this huge list of things that you can't show in pornography in order for it to be okay to show. Because what happens is the second it's deemed obscene, they ban it, they remove it, and oftentimes the people who produced it are then paying a fine or going to jail depending on the infraction. I found a tiny like description of that from, I have a whole documentary, but I'm just going to show you this little Cambria list piece of it. Very short, but they show you this long list of things that they tend to deem as obscene. Okay, let me turn this up. Okay, here we go.
Paul is Paul Cambria, the porn industry's lawyer. He created a list of sex acts that he advised his clients to treat as taboo if they wanted to avoid trouble with the Justice Department.
What are those things? Ejaculation on the face, urination, things that, you know, maybe the Midwestern soccer mom might say, whoa, you know, hello. Don't make adults appear to be underage. That's number one. These so-called bukkake films, an Asian variety of film where 25 men ejaculate on a woman. Stay away from subjects involving the dead. Stay away from subjects involving religion.
It's called the Cambria list, and all the major porn producers have agreed to follow it.
It's a bunch of rich guys running scared. Bunch of guys who were maybe rebels in the 70s and 80s that don't want to fight anymore. They want to take their chips out of the bank, cash them in, and go home and play golf.
But prosecutions are happening. In LA, city attorneys are about to bring the first obscene.
Okay, so just a quick like highlight of that. And then there was a case, so there's a whole documentary about pornography. It's called American Porn. Really interesting that if you're looking for something to watch over break, I don't know, not very festive for break, right? But a really great like discussion of this, and they go into a lot of cases in our backyard of people doing things like fisting, technically fisting, where you insert an entire fist up into somebody's body. Is something that violates obscenity. There's a lot of things with like portraying like people as being underage, certain acts of violence. If it violates these things, then the film gets banned and the people who produced it pay fines or could even go to jail. And this is something that's been a big like battle with pornography since it became popular. And it's something that goes on today, because what happens is our community standards are constantly changing, right? So it used to be that the standard was one thing, and then as our society progresses and we get more desensitized to stuff, those standards change constantly. So all of the pornography that's released has to be evaluated based on that Cambria list and these three prongs of obscenity to see if it will be allowed. There are some obviously positive things to pornography and then some negative things to pornography. A lot of people do engage in using pornography in some way. It can be helpful for arousal. It can be helpful for allowing people to have outlets for fantasies. Maybe a partner doesn't have the same fantasy or the same like level of interest And so it facilitates like masturbation, helps with differing sex drives. So there are definitely some positives to it, but there's a lot of negatives to pornography as well. It definitely depicts sex inaccurately. So if you remember, like way back, we talked about like average penis size for men is like 5.5, 5.6 inches. In pornographic films, typically these men are like 10, 11, 12 inches. They are not typical like size, right? And so oftentimes people use that as a metric, and then they can have very unrealistic expectations. The people in these films are not having like what is considered like typical or normal sex, right? And so oftentimes some of the myths and things that are portrayed in these can cause people to doubt the normality of their sexuality or doubt the sex that they're having in their relationships. So just things to be aware of. They also really portray a lot of violence and sexuality together, really harming things like consent culture. So some of the norms and some of those things in here can be very harmful, but then there's also some positives for pornography as well. Before we move on to the other P, any questions, thoughts, comments, anything pornography related? Questions you don't ask people very often, right? Can you have questions about pornography? Okay. Prostitution is the other like big thing that's in this chapter. So prostitution is when you're exchanging sexual services for money. The proper term for somebody who practices this is a sex worker. That's the PC term. And this is something that has been around throughout history. It's actually sometimes called the oldest profession, right? As we have documented history of people selling themselves or selling sex for services or goods throughout history, right? Especially in like the Victorian era, this was something that was incredibly popular, but even long before that. There's no typical sex worker. It's traditionally women, but it can be men as well. And we have a term brothel for a house in which a group of prostitutes work together. But this is something that, again, has been around for a very, very long time. And I think the stereotype of this is what we would call like a streetwalker, right? Typically somebody who's like standing on a street corner. But it has really evolved quite a bit over time, especially with like technology and the internet and a lot of those things as well. Lots of different names for people who practice this, different names for men and for women. Call girl, right? The idea here is this was somebody that you would call up, right? And that's where the name came from. Courtesan is somebody who caters to like a wealthy clientele. I always think of Moulin Rouge with this, right? Like she was a courtesan, right? That's tending to deal with like the wealthy. Streetwalker being the stereotype. Escorts, sometimes dating services or escorts will be kind of under this category, which may or may not include sex, depending on the agency. Oftentimes they don't kind of advertise the sex piece of it, but it might happen kind of under the table. There's BDSM prostitutes, people who practice bondage and discipline, right? And this could include sex or not. It might be more about being dominated and controlled than sexuality. It depends. And then the term comfort girl was also very popular. That kind of came about in the 1950s as men were off at war, right? That they would find a girl to comfort them while they were overseas. So streetwalker kind of being the stereotype, but lots of different names. And then for men, some similar, but a gigolo. It's kind of one of the most common names for men. Someone who's hired to have a sexual relationship with women and then oftentimes provide or receive money or support from her. A call boy, equivalent of a call girl. Hustler, a male sex worker who provides services to other men. And then escorts for men as well. Traditionally, most of the time, this is women providing this service, but there are male prostitutes as well. Why do you think people become sex workers? If you had to guess, what's the number one reason someone might become a sex worker? Yeah. Okay, right, so maybe they're unemployed, but I also heard money, right? Money is by a mile. People feel desperate, I can sell this for money. That's the number one reason by a mile. But it comes at a very high cost, right? Obviously, there's a lot of like violence associated with this. Because it is illegal, largely illegal, there isn't a lot of protection. So as of right now, as of last week, when I checked, prostitution in the United States is illegal except for 8 counties in Nevada. 2 years ago, it was also legal in Rhode Island, but they got rid of that in an election. So 8 counties in Nevada, not including Las Vegas. So just outside of Las Vegas, prostitution is still legal. So oftentimes what happens in Vegas is they shuttle you outside of the county. They pick you up on the strip and then shuttle you out where it is legal. They're always out there with their little flyers, right? They always think I'm a guy, so they give me the flyers. At one time, this is really not very nice of me, but I'm gonna share it with you anyway, I don't know why. We went to Vegas like before kids, this is 12, 15 years ago. And we were walking down the strip and there's always the guys out there like flipping the little flyers to hand out to you. There's all the girl names like Crystal, Mrs. You call her, like all these things. I got so tired of people giving them to me that I just started collecting them. Because as I walked down the strip, they'd be handing them to me. By the time I left, I had like 150 of them. And then I sprinkled them throughout my father-in-law's house everywhere. I put him in his bed, I put him in his shower. Crystal, Mrs. You call her. I was really proud of myself for that one. No, it's just a prank, right? So it was pretty hilarious. My mother-in-law didn't think it was very funny, but I thought it was hilarious. So, anyway, this is something that's very popular in Nevada. Outside of there, it tends to be something that's very like covert and underground, right? Because it's illegal, it's not advertised, but this is something that happens a lot, right? And think about it on a lesser level, you know, if you go out on a date with somebody and have sex with them in exchange for dinner, right? That is a form of this, right? There's something that's also very informally practiced as well. So as it stands, it's largely illegal, but there's a lot of talk about legalizing this. So marijuana was one of like the big ones within the last like 10 years. We've done a lot of legalizing marijuana. And then this is one of the next things on the docket, right? And so there's been a lot of talk of if we legalize it, that might provide protection for people who want to practice it. They would be registered. They would have to get STD or STI tested regularly. Or decriminalizing it means that we kind of turn our head, right? Which is like a weird gray area in between. So this is something that periodically pops up on like ballots in different states and across the country of considering legalizing it because people do practice this, but with no protection whatsoever as it stands like right now. Any like thoughts or questions or comments or anything before I keep going? Yeah.
Wait, okay, so in Nevada, it's in certain parts. It's
Yeah.
legal.
Mm-hmm.
Do they tax them?
Yeah, I would assume so, right? I mean, I don't know the details of it, but I would assume that there's a lot of revenue from it. That's another big reason why they talk about legalizing it. So there's an incredible amount of revenue that comes from legalizing marijuana, right? They can then get money, the government can get money from it. So by legalizing this, it would also bring in another revenue. So that's something that sometimes is weighed into that decision. Yeah.
This is for the sole purpose of like, they're like, oh yeah, we're protection of it, they're like, it's
Mhm.
it's the same kind of comes up with it so that they're not doing it.
Yeah.
And like,
There's so many things like this, whether it's drugs or sex or abortion or like, I mean, just the number of things where, you know, do we regulate it as a government? Do we protect it as a government? Do we get money from it as a government, right? There's a lot of those things that pop up.
also complete separate sidebar, isn't dominatrix also illegal for prostitution?
Yeah, so that would kind of fall under the like bondage and discipline process, but yes, so somebody could hire a dominatrix to come in essence, like dominate, whip, like embarrass, humiliate them, which may or may not include sex, right? And oftentimes, because again, this is largely illegal, it's not advertised as including sex, but it does often happen anyway. Other thoughts, comments, questions, anything? All right. This is the last slide. Just let that sink in. Okay, I'm gonna get out of this. The last slide of the last chapter on our last day together. Okay, perfect, right, and I still have 14 minutes to stare at you.
Just stare at you.
Just stare. Sex trafficking is the last, I said it again, sorry, is another topic in this chapter. And sadly, this is something that has really like exploded over the last like 10 to 20 years. I don't know if any of you remember, but I want to say it was pre-COVID. But right before COVID, there were some cases of this happening in Simi Valley, right, at a Target in Simi Valley. And I remember being terrified as somebody who has little girls. I have 3 daughters. And I'm like, I need to go find like Liam Neeson and like have him like chase down whoever, right? All the taking movies. But there were cases of this in Simi Valley where people were abducted at Target. And it was a whole huge thing a couple of years before COVID. So this isn't something that just happens in faraway countries. It is a big problem, even in the United States. But it's recruiting or selling or transferring, harboring people into like a form of slavery, right? So this is like a modern day form of slavery where people are kidnapped, often taken to other countries, drugged, and used to provide sexual services against their will. But a very like scary and growing like form of sex for sale. Sometimes people are purposefully sold by poor families as like a type of debt bondage, much more common in other countries that have higher levels of poverty than us. But there's a lot of like force and drugs and financial methods that are used to coerce and control victims, almost exclusively, being women who are captured and sold into this or brought into this. But it is something that the book added, in the last like 10 years, is this has sadly and scarily become more and more prevalent. Not as much in our country, but it is definitely something that happens here. It's often more like when you travel abroad that you're more at risk for this. Yeah.
So it's funny because we were just talking about Vegas and I've only been to Vegas like twice. First time I didn't notice it. I don't know if it was there, but the second time I went into the bathroom and you close the door and then you look and it's a sign that says like, "Paul, if you're being sex trafficked."
Yeah.
And then I kept noticing, like I kept seeing them and it was like specifically in the airport at Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And I was just like, that's crazy
Mhm.
that like they have to make that information available in a bathroom
Yeah.
nonetheless to make it to where whoever that is might get help.
Yeah.
Potentially,
Yeah. Right.
So I don't think it was there last time I went, but it's there like recently.
And you saying that reminded me on our trip. So last week we were in Haiti, Jamaica, and the Bahamas. And in Haiti and Jamaica, I saw it in the bathrooms. There were signs in the bathrooms like of numbers to reach out to or things to do to signal to others that you were like being held against your will. It really is like sadly something that has grown a lot. And so it again was added to the book in that way. Yeah.
Out of like, every company invests stops in, but in at least 7 of them, they also have things like that.
Yeah.
So it's like a big thing with truck drivers also.
Right.
Like, I don't know if it's like them specifically, but they can also like easily disguise themselves and they'll like force you off the road, get you to the rest stop and then.
Right. Yeah. Right. Really important, like to be, aware of your surroundings and aware of the people around you. And it does tend to be more common, like obscure kind of stops on roads, and again, in other countries, but it happens here as well. You can see the signs sometimes in bathrooms of phone numbers to call or things you can do to signal to others that you need help. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's good in a sense that it means increased awareness, increased like signs of how to reach out and get help. But it's bad in the sense that it means it's more prevalent and frequent, right? So you get a little bit of both. I put this in here as an interesting like side note. So I know it's called reefer madness, but if you're interested more in like the history of some of these things, not so much sex trafficking, but more like prostitution and pornography, this book is really like, it's an older book, but it talks about 3 black market like labor trends So, like the black labor market of work, marijuana, which has changed incredible amounts since this was written, but also like sex and pornography and prostitution. So it talks a lot about like the history of that like labor market and how it has evolved into where it is today. People like Larry Flint, who was like the big kingpin of pornography, it talks a lot about that. So just, I thought I would put that up there as like an interesting recommendation. Also a little bit like fitting in the sense that it talks a lot about like Black labor markets and what happens if you get rid of all of the immigrants that are working those markets and like how that would change things. So just in another way, it became kind of timely as well. So I'll leave you with that. I really want to stare at you for 8 more minutes, but I feel like that'd be awkward. So let me just have 1 more minute of your time really quickly. Don't forget about these things up here. As I mentioned, if you didn't turn in participation 9, you can still email it to me. I opened the exam. Okay, so it's open as of right now, but it is due by Monday night. So please don't forget. I will send out a reminder Sunday night and then the closing assignment as well. Yeah.
Is it credit still open?
Yes. So if you wanted, there was a self-care extra credit assignment. It's still on Canvas. You can still email that to me as well. Just make sure anything that you want counted toward your grade is done or submitted by Monday night. Okay, and then last thing, last of the last, right? Thank you all for a really like wonderful semester. I feel like a little guilty saying this, but I have loved this class, right? I feel guilty for my other class, but not for you, right? But this class has just been so like dynamic and we've had such wonderful discussions. I've really loved it. I'm so sad it's over. I'm here if you ever want to take another class with me. I think this is by far the most interesting one that I teach, but I also teach abnormal psych and research methods online and intro psych online. But I hope you all have a wonderful break. Good luck on all of your finals for here and other classes. And just thank you. Thank you for a wonderful semester. All right, now get up. Guys. Before I cry, get up. Thank you. I'll see you all hopefully around.